The Magic of Believing by Claude Bristol. Chapter 3. What the Subconscious Really Is. There is no artist, man of science, or writer of any distinction, however little disposed to self-analysis, is not aware by personal experience of the unequaled importance of the subconscious, wrote Gustave Galli, distinguished French psychologist and author of From the Unconscious to the Conscious. He pointed out that up to the 19th century, the psychology of the subconscious was completely ignored and was considered only as the cause of abnormal disease or accident. Galli added that the best results in life were obtained by close harmony and cooperation between the conscious and subconscious minds. The subconscious plays a very important part in the magic of believing. It will bring you a quicker understanding of this science. You will have a clear and detailed picture of what the subconscious mind is, where it is located, and how it functions, both by itself and in collaboration with the conscious mind. Some of the material in this chapter you will find referred to or repeated in later chapters. But remember that repetition is an essential part of the technique of this science. Repetition is equally effective in presenting the knowledge of this science. Furthermore, the faster you get an understanding of it, the quicker you will be on your way to getting whatever you desire. In giving you this picture of the subconscious mind, I must use scientific terms here and there, since practically all the knowledge of the subconscious has come from the study and experimentation of some of the world's greatest psychologists. But even if you find this a little difficult to understand at first, repeated readings will make it all clear, giving you a solid foundation upon which to proceed with the active part of the science. As I told you in the first chapter, The Law of Psychic Phenomena by Thomas J. Hudson first got me thinking about the subconscious mind and its great possibilities for helping individuals in everyday life. Since that time, other books, such as The Subconscious Speaks by Irma Farrell Grabe and Paul C. Farrell, The Source of Power by Theodore Clinton Foote, The Unconscious by Morton Prince, M.D., and Common Sense and Its Cultivation by Hambury Hankin, have greatly added to the knowledge of the subject. I intend to give you a picture of the conscious and subconscious minds, as well as definite instructions as to how you can bring them under control and direct energies toward fulfilling your desires. There is dormant in each human being a faculty, whether developed or not, which will enable that particular individual to succeed if the desire for success is present in his conscious mind. Thus wrote the authors of The Subconscious Speaks. This faculty has always been known and recognized for its strange and unusual powers, but not until about a century and a half ago did psychologists who made it the subject of their special investigation and experimentation call it the subconscious mind. Emerson was certainly aware of the dual character of the human mental organization when he wrote in his journals, "I find one state of mind does not remember or conceive of another state." Thus, I have written within a 12-month verses, days, which I do not remember the composition or correction of, and could not write the like today, and have only for proof of their being mine various external evidences, as the MS in which I find them, and the circumstances that I have sent copies of them to friends, etc., etc. Today, the words conscious and subconscious are widely understood. It is recognized that we all have two minds, each one endowed with separate and distinct attributes and powers, and each one capable, under certain conditions, of independent action. There's no difficulty in comprehending that the conscious mind operates in the brain. For whatever you do, any concentrated thinking, you feel it in your head. Sometimes the thought is so intense and prolonged that your head aches, or your eyes become tired, or your temples throb. Also, you can generally trace the source of the thought. It may be suggested by something you have seen or heard or read. Perhaps it is a new idea for your business or home. Maybe it is the continuation of some thought you have been pondering for a long time. In short, you can connect it with something already related to your consciousness. Sometimes your thought is concerned with trying to solve a difficult problem, and you have become so exhausted and discouraged at failing to arrive at a solution that you give it up, let the whole thing go, dismiss it from your mind. An action you often take at night when you can't sleep because of the thought that is pounding and gripping your brain. The moment you let it go, it begins to sink, as though we're moving toward somewhere inside of you. The tension in your conscious mind then decreases, and you are soon asleep. The next morning, when you wake up, your conscious mind begins to think again about the problem, when suddenly there appears before your mind's eyes a mental picture of the complete solution, with all the necessary directions for appropriate action on your part. When you released it from your conscious mind, where did the thought go? Through what power inside of you was the problem solved? Many writers, orators, artists, musical composers, designers, inventors, and other creative workers have long made use of their subconscious minds, either consciously or unconsciously. Merton S. Udall, well-known book editor, called my attention to a statement by the American novelist Louis Bromfield. One of the most helpful discoveries I made long ago, in common with some other writers, is that there is a part of the mind, which the psychologists call the subconscious, that works while you are sleeping or even while you are relaxing or engaged in some other task far, far removed from writing. I have found it possible to train this part of the mind to do a pretty organized job. Very often I have awakened in the morning to find a problem of technique or plot or character which had long been troubling me, completely solved while I had been sleeping. The judgment of the subconscious mind, which represents inherited instincts and the accumulation of experience, is virtually infallible, and I would always trust its decision over any judgment arrived at through a long and reasonable process of conscious thinking. No doubt you already have a mental picture of your two minds, the conscious mind in your head, above the line of consciousness, and the subconscious mind in your body, below the line of consciousness, with a means of communication between them. Now, the conscious mind is the source of thought. Also, it gives us the sense of awareness in our normal waking life. The knowledge that we are ourselves here and now, the recognition and understanding of our environment, the power to rule over our mental faculties, to recall the events of our past life, and to comprehend our emotions and their significance. More concretely, it enables us to have a rational understanding of the objects and persons about us, of our own successes or shortcomings, of the validity of an argument or the beauty of work of art. The chief powers of the conscious mind are reason, logic, form, judgment, calculation, conscience, and moral sense. By it we take cognizance of the object world, and its means of observations are our 5 physical senses. Our conscious mind is the outgrowth of our physical necessities, and likewise our guide in the struggle with our material environment. Its highest function is that of reasoning, and by all methods, inductive and deductive, analytical and synthetic. For example, suppose you are undertaking to discover a new theory. You use your conscious mind and employ the inductive method of reasoning. That is, you first collect the facts and elements presented to your sense perceptions, then you compare them one with another, noting similarities and dissimilarities. Then you select those which are alike in qualities, in uses, or in function, after which you proceed to form a generalization or law that certain things which have such qualities will function in such a way. This is the scientific method of arriving at knowledge, and it forms the basis of modern education in schools and colleges. We all use it in some form or other to help solve our problems, whether personal, social, business, professional, or economic. Many times the solution of our problem results from this use of our conscious mind. But now and then, when the solution is not forthcoming, we become exhausted with continued trying. We begin to lose confidence in ourselves, and we often resign ourselves to the idea that we have failed and that nothing can be done about it. Here is where the subconscious mind comes in, to help renew our belief in ourselves, to assist us to overcome our difficulty, and to put us on the road to achievement and success. Just as the conscious mind is the source of thought, so the subconscious is the source of power. Rooted in instinct, it is aware of the individual's most elemental desires, and it is always pressing upward into conscious existence. It is a repository of spontaneous impressions of man and nature, and a memory vault in which are kept the records of facts and experiences sent down to it from time to time by the conscious mind for safekeeping and future use. Thus, the subconscious mind is not only a mighty storehouse of ever-ready material that can be placed at the disposal of the conscious mind, but also a powerhouse of energy with which the individual can be charged, thus enabling them to recover their strength, courage, and faith in themselves. Such is the power of your subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is beyond space and time and is fundamentally a powerful sending and receiving station with a universal hookup. It can communicate with the physical, mental, psychic, and, according to many investigators, spiritual worlds. In brief, the subconscious embodies the feeling and wisdom of the past, the awareness and knowledge of the present, and the thought and wisdom of the future. Emerson, though he wrote of instinct, endowed it with so many superior attributes that he undoubtedly was thinking of the subconscious mind when he wrote, "All true wisdom of thought and of action comes of deference to this instinct, patience with its delays." To make a practical use of this instinct in every part of life constitutes true wisdom, and we must form the habit of preferring in all cases its guidance, which is given as it is used. The powers of the subconscious are many: intuition, emotion, certitude, inspiration, suggestion, deduction, imagination, organization, and of course, memory and dynamic energy. It takes cognizance of its environment by means of independent of the physical senses. It perceives by intuition. It operates most successfully and performs its highest function when the objective senses are quiescent. But it can function during the waking hours as well as during sleep. As a distinct entity, it possesses independent powers and functions, with a unique mental organization all its own. It sustains an existence closely allied to the physical body and the life of the individual, yet also operates independently of the body. Now, the subconscious mind has three primary functions. First, with its intuitive understanding of the bodily needs, it maintains and preserves, unaided by the conscious mind, the well-being and indeed the very life of the physical body. Second, as pointed out in the last chapter, in times of great emergency, it springs into immediate action, again, independently of the conscious mind, and takes supreme command, acting with incredible certitude, rapidity, accuracy, and understanding. Third, it is operative in the psychic world. The psychic powers of the subconscious are manifested in such phenomena as telepathy, clairvoyance, and psychokinesis. But also, it can be summoned to help the conscious mind in time of great personal necessity, when the conscious calls upon the subconscious to use its powers and resources to solve a vital problem or bring to pass whatever the individual seeks or desire. In this book, we are concerned particularly with the technique by which the subconscious mind operates for your benefit. Accordingly, to draw upon the resources and powers of the subconscious and awaken it into action, you must first be sure you are asking for something that is rightfully yours to have and within your ability to handle. For the subconscious manifests itself only according to a person's capabilities. Next, in conveying your need to the subconscious, it must be in images of the work having already been done. Thus, while it is necessary for you to feel and think yourself successful, it is important to go one step further and actually see yourself as already successful, either in the performance of some selected task or as actually occupying the position to which you aspire. For the next and final step, you must wait patiently while the subconscious assimilates the elements of your problem and then goes about its own way to work it out for you. You must have patience and absolute faith, for as Theodore Simon Joffre, the French philosopher, said, the subconscious mind will not take the trouble to work for those who do not believe in it. In due course, with the flowing of the ideas and plans of the subconscious into your awaiting conscious mind, the solution of your problem will be revealed to you and the correct course of action indicated. You must receive the message from the subconscious freely, and after understanding it, you must act at once, immediately, and unquestioningly. There must be no hesitation on your part, no mental reservation, no deliberation. Only by a prompt and automatic response will you make your subconscious continue to respond whenever you call upon it. However, your problem may be one that cannot be solved in this manner. Instead of receiving the solution in the form of a blueprint to guide your steps to the final fulfillment, at intervals you may feel some mysterious force urging you to do certain things that seem to have no special significance or logical connection. Nevertheless, you must continue to believe in the power and wisdom of the subconscious. Obediently perform the seemingly irrelevant things, and one day you will find yourself in the position you sought, doing the work you envisioned for yourself. Then, when you look back, you will see how the things you were called upon to do, through the aid of the subconscious, all formed a logical line of events, the last one of which was your final arriving, the reward of your sincerest hopes and desires, your own triumphant personal success. End of chapter. In this video, we continue with The Magic of Believing by Claude Bristol, Chapter 4, Suggestion is Power. How many times have you heard it said, just believe you can do it, and you can. Whatever the task, if begun with the belief that you can do it, it will be done perfectly. Often, belief empowers a person to do what others consider impossible. The act of believing is the starting force, the generating power that leads to accomplishment. Come on, fellows, we can beat them, shouts someone in command, whether in a football game, on the battlefield, or in the strife of the business world. That sudden voicing of belief, challenging and electrifying, reverses the tide and success. From defeat to victory, And all because some mighty believer knew that it could be done. You may be shipwrecked and tossed into the water near a rocky shore. Momentarily, you may fear that there isn't a chance for you. Suddenly, a feeling comes that you will be saved or that you can save yourself. The moment you have that feeling, it begins to take the form of belief, and along with the belief comes the power to assist you. You may be in a fire, surrounded by flames and enveloped in smoke, and frantic with fear. The same power asserts itself, and you may be saved. Emerson explains it by saying that in a difficult situation or a sudden emergency, our spontaneous action is always the best. Many stories have been told of the great reserves of the subconscious mind, how under its direction and by imparting its superhuman strength, frail men and women have been able to perform feats far beyond their normal powers. Speakers, stand-up comedians, and writers are often amazed at the subconscious mind's power to furnish them with a steady flow of thoughts that their audiences enjoy. After studying the various mystical religions and different teachings and systems of mind stuff, I'm impressed that they all have the same basic modus operandi. That is, they achieve success through repetition, the repeating of certain mantras, words, or formulas. William Seabrook declared that witch doctors, voodoo high priests, hexers, and many other followers of strange cults use just plain mumbo-jumbo to invoke the spirits or work black magic. One finds the same principle at work in the chants, incantations, litanies, daily lessons to repeat it as frequently as possible during the week, and the frequent praying of the Buddhists and Muslims alike. Or consider the affirmations of Theosophists and the followers of unity, the absolute, truth, new thought, divine science. In fact, it is basic in all religions, although here it is white magic instead of black. When you seek further, you find the same principle at work in the beating of tom-toms or kettle drums by primitive peoples in all parts of the globe. The sound vibrations arouse similar vibrations in the psychic nature of these so-called primitives, so that they become stimulated, excited, and emotionalized to the point where they can defy death. The war dances of the American Indians, with their repeated rhythmic physical movements, the tribal ceremonies to bring rain, the dancing of the whirling dervishes, even the playing of martial music at critical times, and the soothing background music played for the workers in industrial plants, all embody the same principle. In his book, Penthouse of the Gods, published in 1939, Theos Bernard recounts some interesting facts as to the repetition of certain mystical chants and prayers. When he wrote, he claimed to be the first white person to enter the mysterious Tibetan city of Lhasa, high in the Himalayas, where the monasteries contain thousands of lamas, followers of Buddha. On reading the book, you get the impression that when the lamas and monks are not eating or attending to the material wants of their bodies, they are constantly and continuously engaged in their mystical chants using the prayer wheels. Bernard declared that in one temple, the monks started at daybreak and spent the entire day repeating prayers. The exact number of the repetitions was 1,008. He told also of how lamas accompanying him repeated certain fixed chants in order to give him additional strength. In all religions, cults, and orders, there is an obvious prescribed ritual in which the repetition of words, mystical or otherwise, plays an important part. And this brings us to the law of suggestion. Forces operating within its limits are capable of producing phenomenal results. That is, the power of suggestion. Either autosuggestion, your own to yourself, or heterosuggestion, coming to you from outside sources, starts machinery into operation, causing the subconscious mind to begin its creative work. And right here is where the affirmations and repetitions play their part. Repetition of the same chant, the same incantations, the same affirmations leads to belief. And once that belief becomes a deep conviction, things begin to happen. A builder or contractor looks over a set of plans and specifications for a bridge or a building, and urged by a desire to get the contract for the work, declares to himself, "I can do that. Yes, I can do that." He may repeat it silently to himself 1,000 times without being conscious of doing it. Nevertheless, the suggestion finds a place in which to take root. He gets the contract, and the structure is eventually built. Conversely, he may say that he can't do it, and he never does. Hitler used the identical force and the same mechanics in inciting the German people to attack the world. A reading of his Mein Kampf will verify that. Dr. René Faubel, a famous French psychologist, explained it by saying that Hitler had a remarkable understanding of the law of suggestion and its different forms of application, and that he mobilized every instrument of propaganda in his mighty campaign of suggestion with uncanny skill and masterly showmanship. Hitler openly stated that the psychology of suggestion was a terrible weapon in the hands of anyone who knew how to use it. Let's see how he worked to make the German believe what he wanted them to. Slogans, posters, huge signs, masked flags appeared throughout Germany. Hitler's picture was everywhere. One Reich, one people, one leader became the chant. It was heard everywhere that a group gathered. Today we own Germany, tomorrow the entire world. The marching song of the German youths came from thousands of throats daily. Such slogans as "Germany has waited long enough," "Stand up, you are the aristocrats of the Third Reich," "Germany's behind Hitler to a man," and hundreds of others bombarded them 24 hours a day from billboards, sides of buildings, the radio, and the press. Every time they moved, turned around, or spoke to one another, they got the idea that they were a superior race, and once that belief took hold, they started their campaign of terror. Under the hypnotic influence of this belief, strengthened by repeated suggestions, they started out to prove it. Unfortunately for them, other nations also had strong national beliefs that eventually became the means of bringing defeat to the Germans. Italy, a place in the sun. Signs and slogans such as "Believe, obey, fight." Italy must have its great place in the world. We have some old scores and new scores to settle. Covered the walls of thousands of buildings. And similar ideas were dinned into the people via the radio and every other means of direct communication. Joseph Stalin, too, used the same science to build Russia into what she is today. In November 1946, the Institute of Modern Hypnotism, recognizing that Stalin had been using the great power of the repeated suggestion in order to make the Russian people believe in their strength, named him as one of the 10 persons with the most hypnotic eyes in the world, and rated him as a mass hypnotist. The Japanese warlords used it to make fanatical fighters out of their people. From the very day of their birth, Japanese children were fed the suggestion that they were direct descendants of heaven and destined to rule the world. They prayed it, chanted it, and believed it. But here again, it was used wrongly. For 44 years, ever since the Russo-Japanese War, the Japanese immortalized naval warrant officer Magoshichi Sugino, one of Japan's early suicide fighters and greatest heroes. Thousands of statues were erected to his memory. In repeated song and story, young Nipponese were taught to believe that they could die in no more heroic manner than by following his example. Millions of them believed it, and during the war, thousands of them did die as kamikaze pilots. Yasujino, who was supposed to have gone to his death while scuttling a ship to bottle up the Russian fleet at Port Arthur, didn't die in battle. He was picked up by a Chinese boat. Upon learning that he was being lauded by his people as a great martyr, he decided to remain obscure and became an exile in Manchuria. Although he was alive and well, it continued to be dinned into the ears of young Nipponese that there was no greater heroic act than to die as Sugino had. This terrible, persistent, and deeply founded belief, though based entirely on a fable, caused thousands of Japanese to throw away their lives during the war. Finally, Associated Press dispatches from Tokyo in November 1946 told how he was discovered after many years and was being returned home. Americans, too, were subjected to the power of suggestion long before World War I, and got it again in a big way under the direction of General Hugh Johnson with his NRA plan. In World War II, we were constantly told that Germany and Japan had to be defeated unconditionally. Under the constant repetition of the same thought, all individual thinking was paralyzed, and the mass mind became grooved to a certain pattern. Win the war unconditionally. As one writer so ably said, in war, the voice of dissension becomes the voice of treason. Again, we see the terrific force of thought repetition. It is our master, and we do as we are ordered. The subtle force of the repeated suggestion overcomes our reason, acting directly on our emotions and our feelings, finally penetrating to the very depths of our subconscious minds. This is the basic principle of all successful advertising. The continued and repeated suggestion that first makes you believe, after which you are eager to buy. In recent years, we have enjoyed a vitamin spree. Vitamins, minerals, and various natural and organic foods have come to us from all sides, and millions buy them. So potent is the repeated suggestion of their value. For centuries, tomatoes were looked upon as poisonous. People dared not eat them until some fearless person tried them and lived. Today, millions of people eat tomatoes, not knowing that they were considered unfit for human consumption. Conversely, the lowly spinach nearly went into the garbage pail after the United States government declared that it did not contain the food values attributed to it for decades. Millions believed this and refused to honor Popeye's favorite dish any longer. Clearly, the founders of all great religious movements knew much about the power of the repeated suggestion and gained far-reaching results with it. Religious teachings have been hammered into us from birth, into our mothers and fathers before us, and into their parents and their parents before them. There's certainly white magic in that kind of believing. Such statements as what we don't know won't hurt us and ignorance is bliss take on a greater significance when you realize that only the things you become conscious of can harm or bother you. We have all heard the story of the man who didn't know it couldn't be done and went ahead and did it. Psychologists tell us that as babies, we have only two fears: the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. All our other fears are passed on to us or develop as a result of our experiences. They come from what we are taught or what we hear and see. I like to think of men and women as staunch oak trees that can stand firm amid the many cross-currents of thought that whirl around them. But far too many people are like saplings that, swayed by every little breeze, ultimately grow in the direction of some strong wind of thought that blows against them. The Bible is filled with examples of the power of thought and suggestion. Read Genesis chapter 30, verses 36 to 43, and you'll learn that even Jacob knew their power. The Bible tells how he developed spotted and speckled cattle, sheep, and goats by placing rods from trees, partially stripping them of their bark so they would appear spotted and marked in the watering troughs where the animal came to drink. As you may have guessed, the flocks conceived before the spotted rods and brought forth cattle, ring-straight, speckled, and spotted. And incidentally, Jacob waxed exceedingly rich. Moses, too, was a master at suggestion. For 40 years, he used it on the Israelites, and it took them to the promised land of milk and honey. David, following the suggestive forces operating on him, slew the mighty, heavily armed Goliath with a pebble from a slingshot. Joan of Arc, the frail little maid of Orleans, heard voices and under their suggestive influences became imbued with the idea that she had a mission to save France. She was able to transmit her indomitable spirit to the hearts of her soldiers, and she defeated the superior forces of the English at Orleans. William James, father of modern psychology in America, declared that often our faith in advance of a doubtful undertaking is the only thing that can assure its successful conclusion. Man's faith, according to James, acts on the powers above him as a claim and creates its own verification. In other words, the thought becomes literally father to the fact. For further illumination of faith and its power, I suggest that you read the general epistle of James in the New Testament. Actually, everyone who has ever witnessed a football or baseball game has seen this power of suggestion at work. Knute Rockne, the famous coach at Notre Dame, knew the value of suggestion and used it repeatedly, but always suited his method of applying it to the temperament of the individual team. On one Saturday afternoon, Notre Dame was playing in a particularly grueling game, and at the end of the first half was trailing badly. The players were in their dressing room nervously awaiting Rockne's arrival. Finally, the door opened, and Rockne came in slowly. His eyes swept inquiringly over the squad. "Oh, excuse me. I made a mistake. I thought these were the quarters of the Notre Dame team." The door closed, and Rockne was gone. Puzzled and then stung with fury, the team went out for the second half and won the game. Other writers, too, have explained the psychological methods Rockne used and have told how Fielding Yost of Michigan, Dan McGuinn of Vanderbilt, Herbert Chrysler of Princeton, and dozens of others used the magic of suggestion to arouse their teams to great emotional heights. Before the Rose Bowl game of 1934, the wise tipsters rated the Columbia team as underdogs. They hadn't counted on Coach Lou Little and his stirring talks to his players day after day. When the whistle blew for the end of the game, the Columbia men were the top dogs over the superior Stanford team. In 1935, Gonzaga University beat powerful Washington State 13-6 in one of the biggest upset games ever seen in the West. Gonzaga was a non-conference team, while the Washington State team, because of its great record, was thought to be unbeatable. Newspapers at the time reported assistant coach Sam Dagley as having declared that Gonzaga played inspired football. He revealed that for half an hour before the game, Coach Mike Pekarovic played over and over a phonograph record of one of Rockne's most rousing pep talks. Years ago, Cochran and the Detroit Tigers literally drove a second division-minded group of baseball players to the top of the American League by using the power of the repeated suggestion. I quote from a newspaper dispatch. "Day after day, through the hot, hard grind, Cochran preached the gospel of victory, impressing on the Tigers the continued thought that the team which wins must go forward." You see the same force actively at work in the fluctuations of the stock market. Unfavorable news immediately depresses prices, while favorable news raises them. The intrinsic values of stocks are not changed, but there is an immediate change in the thinking of the market operators, which is reflected at once in the minds of the holders. Not what will actually happen, but what security holders believe will happen causes them to buy or sell. In the Depression years, and there may be years like them in the future, we saw this same suggestive force working over time. Day after day, we heard expressions such as "times are hard," "business is poor," "the banks are failing," "prosperity hasn't a chance," and wild stories about business failures on every hand, until they became the national chant. Millions believed that prosperous days would never return. Hundreds, yes, thousands of strong-willed men go down under the constant hammering, the continuous tapping of the same fearful thoughts. Money, always sensitive, runs to cover when fear suggestions begin to circulate, and business failures and unemployment quickly follow. We hear thousands of stories of bank failures, huge concerns going to the wall, etc., and people readily believe them, and Act accordingly. There will never be another business depression if people generally realize that their own fearful thoughts literally create hard times. They think hard times, and hard times follow. So it is with wars. When peoples of the world stop thinking of depressions and wars, they will become non existent. For nothing comes into our economic sphere unless we first create it with our emotional thinking. Dr. Walter Dill Scott, eminent psychologist and long president of Northwestern University, told the whole story when he said, "Success or failure in business is caused more by mental attitudes than by mental capacities." You may have read of the night of October 20, 1938, when Orson Welles and his Mercury Theater players broadcast a dramatization of H.G. Wells' novel, The War of the Worlds. It was a story of an invasion by some strange warriors from the planet Mars, but it caused fright among thousands of people. Some rushed outdoors, police stations were besieged, Eastern telephone exchanges were blocked, New Jersey highways were dogged. In fact, for a few hours following the broadcast, there was a genuine panic among millions of listeners who believed our Earth was being attacked by invaders from Mars. Yes, indeed. Belief does cause some strange and unusual happenings. Human beings are human beings the world over, all subject to the same emotions, the same influences, and the same vibrations. And what is a big business, a village, a city, a nation, but merely a collection of individual humans controlling and operating it with their thinking and believing? As individuals think and believe, so they are. As a whole city of them thinks, so it is. And as a nation of them think, so it is. This is an inescapable conclusion. Every person is the creation of themselves, the image of their own thinking and believing. As King Solomon put it, "For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he." Rallies held in schools and colleges just before important athletic contests are based on the same principles. Speeches, songs, and yells become the means of creating suggestion and arousing the will to win. Many sales managers employ the same principle in their morning sales meetings, when frequently music is used to emotionalize the salesman and to get the idea over to them that they can beat all their previous sales records. The same principle, with varying technique, is basic in the Army. In fact, all armies. The commands and formations constantly repeated in close order drill develop in the man instant obedience, which ultimately becomes instinctive. The commands and formations become so fixed in their minds and bodies that their movements are almost automatic, all of which in turn creates that self-confidence which is absolutely necessary in active conflict. It is very important to remember that the subconscious will go into action at once under the impetus of the commands or suggestions it receives from the conscious mind, or which come from outside sources and are transmitted to it via the conscious mind. But it gets results quicker if the conscious mind accompanies its message with a mental picture of the desired goal. It may be faint, sketchy, or even unfinished, but even if only an outline, it will be enough for the subconscious to act upon it. And this brings us to the rituals and ceremonies performed amid dramatic settings in churches and secret orders, all designed to appeal to the emotions and to create a mystical picture in the beholders' minds. These rituals, no matter what the setting, are there to hold your attention and link these symbols' hidden meanings with the particular ideas to be implanted in your mind. Various lighting arrangements, different paraphernalia, often a special garb for those directing the operations, all to the accomplishment of soft, often religious music, all help to put you in the proper emotional and incidentally receptive state. The idea is as old as history. Not only the most civilized peoples, but also the most primitive tribes have their characteristic ceremonials. Similar methods for impressing the individual are employed at mediumistic seances and crystal gazing performances. Even the gypsy phrenologist considers it a part of her props. Without this atmosphere, which tends to make our conscious mind drowsy and even puts it temporarily to sleep, we would not be so easily convinced. For by itself, the desire to satisfy completely our longings for the mystical and miraculous is often not so strong to permit conviction. This is not said with any idea of being sacrilegious, but to present a picture of the historic method of appealing to the masses. Appeal by drama is the first step in arousing people's emotions, no matter for what purpose. Awakening and stirring their emotional interest prepares the way to approach their reasoning minds. Could Amy Semple McPherson, with the long flowing white robe and picturesque auburn hairdo, have put over her great act of saving souls as well as achieving healings without her superb understanding of the power of the dramatic? It's something to wonder about, because Billy Sunday, in his best table sliding act, was a novice compared to Amy when it came to showmanship and plain impressiveness. She, with her many artifices and stage settings, put on the most solemn performance, and her followers, on the Pacific coast at least, declare that the results she got were real and lasting. This is no reflection on Mrs. McPherson, for her followers were very sincere and believed in her work, her teachings, and the results, and that's all that matters. However, men and women with strong personal magnetism and great orators can get the same emotional effect without props or stage settings to aid them. They are masters of tone effects, emotional appeal, gesticulations, bodily movements, eye magnetism, etc., by which your attention is held and you yourself are thrown wide open to their driving appeal. Let's consider charms, talismans, amulets, good luck pieces, four-leaf clovers, old horseshoes, rabbit's feet, and countless other trinkets which thousands of people believe in. By themselves, they are harmless, inanimate objects with no power. But when people breathe life into them by their thinking, they do have power, even though the power isn't in them per se. The power comes only with the believing, which alone makes them effective. An outstanding illustration of this is found in the story of Alexander the Great and Napoleon. In Alexander's day, an oracle proclaimed that whoever unloosened the Gordian knot would become ruler of all Asia. Alexander cut the knot with one stroke of his sword and rose to tremendous heights and power. Napoleon was given a star sapphire when a child, with the prophecy that it would bring him luck and someday make him emperor. Could anything but the supreme belief in the prophecy have carried this great man to become emperor of France? He and Alexander became supermen because they had supernormal beliefs. A cracked or broken mirror isn't going to bring you bad luck unless you believe in it. But as long as the belief is fertilized, nurtured, and made a part of your inner self, believe it or not, it is going to bring you bad luck. Because the subconscious mind always brings to reality what it is led to believe. Bird and Tompkins' The Secret Life of Plants claimed there are people with certain mind powers which, when directed at plant life, such as a grain, vegetables, flowers, and trees, can make them grow more abundantly. A number of years ago, we had an old Swiss gardener who insisted that we replace a number of small trees and shrubs in our yard. At first, I couldn't see the reason for digging up the old ones and replanting others, but the old man's insistence prevailed. I observed that while planting them, just after he got the small trees in the soil and covered the roots, he engaged in some sort of audible mumbo-jumbo. He did the same with the little shrubs. One day, my curiosity piqued. I asked him what he was mumbling about as he placed the trees and shrubs in the ground. He looked at me searchingly for a moment, then said, "You may not understand, but I'm talking to them, telling them they must live and bloom. It's something I learned as a boy from my teacher in the old country. Anything that grows should have encouragement, and I'm giving it to them. Certain humans appear to have a kind of affinity for plants, which the plants seem to feel. Thousands of professional gardeners will plant seeds only at certain times of the moon. Superstition, you say? Perhaps it is practical mysticism. The Yale investigators concluded that electrical fields play a major part in plant life, and certainly that is a scientific observation. It is a long way from Switzerland to British Columbia, but in that Canadian province is a tribe of Indians, the members of which always talk to their lines and hooks before actually starting to fish, claiming that if they didn't, the halibut and salmon wouldn't bite. Many are the tales of South Sea Islanders who offer food to their tools and implements, talking to them as though they were alive and beseeching them to get results. It isn't a great jump from those customs to the blessings offered at ship launchings or at sailing times of large fishing fleets and civilized countries, where prayers are offered even today for successful voyages or ventures. I recall a thrifty neighbor of mine who, although a man of intelligence and mature years, had his hair cut at only certain times of the moon. I don't remember whether it was when the moon was waxing or waning, but he maintained that whatever phase he selected caused his hair to grow less abundantly than if he had visited the barber at other times. I asked him once where he got such an idea. He glared at me as though I were belittling his intelligence, and I never did get an answer to my question. What I have said about plant and animal life may cause a lot of materialistic people to take violent issue, but it must be remembered that at work in the world are many forces of which we know little or nothing. Consider how many new principles were developed in World War II. In the late 1940s, the American Rocket Society made an application to the United States government for land on the moon. Perhaps the application was made in a spirit of facetiousness, but Americans landed on the moon only 20 years later. Without question, human imagination, visualization, and concentration are the chief factors in developing the subconscious mind's magnetic forces. You have often heard the statement, "hold that pose." That, of course, means holding the mental picture or vision. Here again, suggestion, repeated suggestion, plays its part. For example, you would like a new home. Your imagination goes to work. At first, you have only a hazy idea of the kind of house you would like. Then, as you discuss it with other members of your family, or ask questions of builders, or look at illustrations of new houses, the mental picture becomes clearer and clearer until you can visualize your ideal house in all its particulars. After that, the subconscious goes to work to provide you with that house. It may come into manifestation in any number of ways, but do you really care whether you build it with your own hands or whether it comes to you through purchase or from the actions of outsiders? How it comes to you is of no great consequence. When you are after a better job or planning a vacation trip, the process is the same. You've got to see it in your mind's eye. See yourself as holding that job or actually taking the trip. Some of our fears become realities through our imaginations, just as Job's did. Fortunately, many of them do not. As long as we hold the mental picture only temporarily, or at least not long enough to focus it fully upon the screen of our subconscious. The biblical warning, "where there is no vision, the people perish," is a fundamental truth, whether considered individually or collectively. For without the mental picture of accomplishment, little is done. You want a better job? You'll get it when you give your subconscious mind a mental picture of yourself holding that job. As I write this, I think of the many experiences confided to me by those who have used this science during the years. I want to give you some of their stories, for in them you may perhaps find clues to an even more effective use of the principles and the mechanics which I am setting forth. A friend got the idea of building a boat. He knew nothing about boat construction, but believed that with some simple instructions he could build one. So he went ahead. In the course of the work, he found that he needed an electric drill, but he didn't want to spend $75 or $80 for the kind he wanted, especially when he would be using it for only a few months. First, he tried renting a drill, but inasmuch as he could use it only at night and had to return it early the next morning, he found such an arrangement very inconvenient. He told me, I got to thinking one night that somewhere there was a drill for me and I would have it placed in my hands. The more I thought about it, the more I thought it possible. However, nothing happened for several days. Then one evening, a friend who owned a sizable garage, a man I hadn't seen for a couple of years, came to see me. He too was interested in boats, and hearing that I was building one, said he'd like to look it over. He saw me floundering around in the heavy half-inch drill I was using and asked me where I got it. I told him I had rented it, and he laughed, saying, Come over to my shop tomorrow and I'll lend you a smaller one which you can handle much easier. Needless to say, I got it and kept it during all the period I was constructing the boat. A somewhat similar experience happened when I was cutting the ribs. I found that a small jigsaw wouldn't cut through the 3/4 inch lumber. Then I caught myself wishing for a bandsaw. That thought led me to a woodworking shop a few blocks away from my house. I could use the bandsaw if I paid the owner 50 cents an hour for its use. However, I found that I was running to and from my home, first to fit the ribs and then to shape them, and losing much time in the process. I frequently said to myself during those days that there must be some easier way to get to use of a bandsaw, and there it was. The following Sunday, another friend came to see how the boat was coming along. When I told him that I had been slowed down without the use of a bandsaw, he too laughed, saying, I bought one Thursday and won't be using it for some time. Got to get my shop fixed up, and in the meantime, you're welcome to use it. As a matter of fact, he delivered it to me that same day, and I kept it a number of months. I finished the boat. Another man told me how he got the use of a 30-foot extension ladder with which to paint his house. I thought I would undertake the painting in my spare time, he told me, and began looking around to find where I could get the use of a ladder. I found places where I could rent one, but their fixed time requirements didn't fit into my plans. I don't know how many times I said to myself, You're going to find a ladder. And I did. It was Memorial Day, and while in my backyard, I happened to notice that my neighbor across the street was using a long ladder to wash off the walls of his house. I called him, asking where he got the ladder. He told me he had bought it when he purchased the house. That afternoon, it was in my backyard, and I had the loan for it for several weeks. Another man told me that shortly after Pearl Harbor, he had been looking for a garbage can of a certain size, but because of wartime priorities, he was unable to locate what he wanted. He visited secondhand stores, junk shops, bakeries, and garages to find the kind of container he wanted, but without success. He was about to give up hope when, one morning, he noticed workmen making repairs on a concrete building across from his home. They were using some waterproofing material from exactly the kind of can he had pictured for his own use. He asked the man in charge of the work what would be done with the container when the work was finished, and was told it would be left on the ground to be hauled away. He then explained his wants, and a couple of days later the container was in his garage. The workman had not only emptied it, but had washed and scrubbed it before delivery. I had taken my car to a shop owner for repairs to the ignition system. After several mechanics had failed to locate the trouble, I told him how the car had been acting, and after listening, he said, I believe I can fix it. I casually remarked, Belief is a great thing, isn't it? You bet it is. Thought is the greatest force in the world, and the dumb ducks laugh when you talk about it. He answered rather caustically. I don't. I'm interested, I replied. Tell me of some instances where you have demonstrated the power of thought. I could keep you here all day telling you of its power, at least in my own life. Tell me a few. When did you first become aware of it? Oh, I guess about 12 years ago, when I fell and broke my back. I was in a cast for a long time, and the doctors told me that even if I recovered, I would be crippled the rest of my life. As I lay on my back in the hospital worrying about my future, I frequently thought of the words as used by my mother to the effect of, "One just has to believe." One day it dawned on me that if I could hold on to the mental picture I was going to be all right, and I believed in it sufficiently, I could get well. To make a long story short, here I am crawling over and underneath cars, and far from being a cripple, as you can see for yourself. Very interesting, I urged. Tell me more. Well, I've used it frequently to get more business. As a matter of fact, this present location is a result of it. As you know, I was burned out of my old place a few weeks ago, and space like this in the city is well nigh impossible to find. For 2 or 3 days, I worried about not being able to find another location and deliberated whether I should attempt to go to work for someone else. Then one night, I made up my mind I would continue in business for myself. That was the turning point. Just before I went to sleep, I said to myself, "Oh, you'll find a place within the next few days." This thought power hasn't failed you yet? I went to sleep with full confidence that the place would be forthcoming. The very next day, I went over to see the painter where I had taken the car I saved from the fire and mentioned I was looking for another place. "That's funny," he commented. "You can rent this space. I've just bought the building in the next block from an owner who wanted to retire. And so now here I am, on a main thoroughfare and with more business than I can possibly handle." I know that some readers will say that these are merely coincidences, but my files are filled with similar coincidences. To some of you, they may be just that. But those acquainted with this science know that these things come about as the result of intensified thought or mental picture making. However, we come again to a matter of opinion. The difference in conclusions between those who think this is all nonsense and those who know that these things we think materialize after their kind. Again, we're reminded of what Paracelsus said: men devoid of the power of spiritual perception are unable to recognize anything that cannot be seen externally. It is pretty well agreed that the subconscious mind works as a result of images thrown upon its screen. But if there is something wrong with your projection apparatus or the original slide, then the projected image is blurred, inverted, or a total blank. Doubts, fears, counter thoughts all manage to blur the pictures you consciously desire to project. Those who have well-developed imaginations, such as great artists, writers, and inventors, possess the ability to visualize or to make mental pictures almost at will. However, with the mechanics which I will enlarge upon later and the explanations already given, anyone following them should have no difficulty in being able to see in their mind's eye the things, objects, or situations that they desire in reality. One of the greatest fishermen I ever knew used this visualizing method. He could sit in a boat with one or two others and pull trout after trout out of the water, while his companions, using the same kind of bait and with apparently the same mechanical technique, dropped their hooks in the same places repeatedly, without results. I asked him about it one time, and he laughingly replied, "I put the old squeeze-a-magittum," his word for magic, on them. I figuratively or mentally get down there where they are and tell them to hook the bait or fly. In other words, I see them snapping at the hook and believe that it will work. That's all I can give you in the way of explanation. This story was told to another fisherman, not blessed with the first fisherman's luck, and he scoffed at it. "Ridiculous," he declared. "Any good fisherman must know the stream, the holes, the habits of fish, the type of bait or flies to use, and he'll catch them if they are there." However, he couldn't explain how others skilled in fishing technique could fish in an identical spot and still not catch them like the man who used the old squeeze-a-magittum. Ben-Hur Lampman was associate editor of the Oregonian, author of many articles and books on fishing and kindred subjects, and a recognized naturalist. Upon reading this story, he said, The man who says that it is ridiculous to consider there's some sort of magic or attraction at work makes himself ridiculous by displaying his ignorance. I can't explain how your friend is always so fortunate in making his catches beyond saying that there is decidedly something psychic about successful fishing. Anyone who has studied the habits of fish and tried to catch them sooner or later realizes that there is more to successful fishing than merely throwing a lure or bait into a place where the fish are supposed to be. Just what the relationship is between mind and fish, if any, I cannot explain. But having been a student of fish, their ways and habits practically all my life, I do know that in successful fishing there is an unexplainable element or factor at work. Call it what you please. Undoubtedly, in the realm of psychic phenomena lies the explanation of the so-called fisherman's luck, or the soza magidum of your successful fisherman friend. I am not a fisherman, but surely if this law of attraction works in other ways, there's no reason why it could not be used advantageously in fishing. For many years I was interested in the game of golf, and I was a member of several clubs. I frequently played with a man who had been one of the world's tennis champions in his younger days. He was one of the most amazing short shot players on the Pacific coast. With his mashie or mashie niblick, he could place the ball on any desired spot on the green with a dead stop, as close to or as far from the pin as he desired, and he was usually down in one putt. His putting, too, was an art to marvel at. One day, he amazed everyone in our foursome with what could be called phenomenal shots. "How did you do it, George?" I asked. "Well," he replied, "you've played handball and squash, and you know what it means to place your shots on the front wall. You intuitively place it high or low, or so it will rebound to a side wall, or result in a kill or an extremely low ball. I learned placement years ago in tennis. You have a sort of mental picture where you want the ball to go or land before you hit it with your bracket. I use the same principle with my short shots and putting. In other words, when I face the green and before I swing my club, I have an instant mental picture of where I want the ball to land. And when I putt, I actually see the ball dropping into the hole. Of course, a proper stance and knowledge of handling the clubs are vital. But most golfers have that and still don't get results. It is true that I spend many hours in practice. So do others. But the main thing is that I just seem to know where the ball is going to land before the club hits it. There's a confidence or a belief existing that I can do it, and with a mashie or a mashie niblick, I cause a backspin that will bring the ball to a dead stop when it lands. For you who may raise your eyebrows at this, let's examine the facts given in a newspaper story written in the middle 30s by the famous sports writer Grantland Rice. Rice declared that the phenomenal amateur golf player John Montague could run rings around anyone. The ball always landed where he wanted to place it, whether 300 yards down the fairway or a chip shot to within 2 or 3 feet of the cup. And then, when he putted, it was like the crack of doom. Rice said that the ball went where Montague wanted it to go. Now let's read Montague's own explanation as given in the same newspaper story. Golf to me is played with the head, mind or brain, or whatever you wish to call it. Of course, there are fundamentals of stance, grip, swing, but I must have a clear mental picture of what I am doing before I play the shot. The mental picture takes charge of the muscular reaction. If there is no mental picture, what happens is a mere guess. This means almost endless concentration of thought if you are under pressure, and there's no thrill in any game unless you are under pressure. Gene Sarazen, one of the greatest golf professionals of all times, used similar methods in his matches. His little book, Golf Tips, has much to say about mental pictures, objectives, concentration, and confidence. All golfers have read of mental hazards. In reality, they are bunkers, traps, water hazards, etc. But in the imaginations of many, They are formidable handicaps that put fear into the hearts of the players. On one course where I often played, there was a water hole. The distance from the tee to the hole was about 120 yards, spanning a small pond approximately 50 feet wide. An easy shot with a mashie or a mashie niblick for the average player. For a long time, one member of the club, who had been a great baseball and football player in his younger days, could never get over this water hazard. Invariably, he would put ball after ball into the water with his irons, to the accompaniment of profanity on his part and laughter on ours. Finally, as the months went by, he took to using his spoon and hitting the ball far beyond the green. One day I said to him, "I know the water fools you, but the next time just blot out of your mind the picture of water between the tee and the green and see instead mentally an easy short fairway before you." The first time he followed the suggestion, his ball fell a few inches from the pin, and from that time on, he later told me, as long as he followed the blotting out technique, he never had any trouble. But when he was unable to concentrate on his own mental picture due to the joshing from other members of his foursome, he landed in difficulties. In observing many pool and billiard games, I am convinced that certain skilled players influence the direction and fall of the balls by mind control, although they may be in complete ignorance of the power they're using. If it can work on a golf ball, it certainly can work on a billiard ball. The naturalist Roy Chapman Andrews told the story of a man from San Antonio, Texas, who, with a .22 caliber rifle, fired more than 14,500 shots at small blocks of wood tossed into the air without a single miss. Mr. Andrews emphasized his perfect timing and remarkable accuracy. Nothing was said of the mind pictures, but if you have ever done any prolonged trap or target shooting, you know the part visualizing plays. One finds the same sort of magic at work in all fields of sports. Great baseball batters, expert forward passer in football, accurate drop kickers, all consciously or unconsciously picture connecting with the ball and placing it where they want it to go. Certainly, practice and timing all have their primary importance, but the mental side must never be overlooked. In this connection, I was impressed by several statements made by Dr. Marcus Bach in one of his first books, They Have Found a Faith. Dr. Bach tells of bowling with Father Divine, and of observing from the way Father Divine selected a ball and from his stance and delivery that he was no bowler. Yet Father Divine made a strike on his first try, and it was one of the prettiest strikes Dr. Bach ever saw. Father's nonchalance was characteristic. He rubbed the soft palms of his hands together as if to say, "Well, what do you expect when the Lord rolls one?" Dr. Bach also wrote of an interview with Rickard Fillmore, manager of Unity City and son of one of the founders of Unity Movement. Dr. Bach asked if the works of Unity could be applied to a real estate venture. Mr. Fillmore replied, "If it works at all, it works everywhere." Many readers of this book may not be golfers or billiard players, but a simple experiment will demonstrate to you the strange power of attraction through visualizing, or making the mental picture actually work. Find a few small stones or pebbles which you can easily throw and locate a tree or post between 6 and 10 inches in diameter. Stand away from it 25 or 30 feet and start throwing the pebbles in an attempt to hit it. If you have average aim, most of the stones will go wide off their mark. Get a mental picture of the tree figuratively stepping forward to meet the stone, or of the pebble actually colliding with the tree in the spot where you want it to strike, and you'll soon find yourself making a perfect score. Don't say it's impossible. Try it, and you'll prove it can be done, if only you will believe it. In the early days of wartime gasoline rationing, most people didn't consider getting additional coupons a criminal offense. A friend found he didn't have enough gas to take him to his duck lake one Sunday. He told me how he had secured enough coupons to make several trips to the shooting grounds. I had just about given up the idea of duck shooting this fall when the thought occurred to me that I could put this mind stuff to work and get some more gas. Of course, everyone around the office knew that I wanted to go duck shooting, and most of them knew of my problem. Whether they passed out word to their friends, I do not know. But I got more coupons than you could shake a stick at. I had a constant picture of going hunting and using my automobile and of someone giving me gasoline coupons. It may be hokey, but I got the coupons. Even a farmer friend gave me gas out of his allotment. Now let's take this same science into the kitchen. Did it ever occur to you that the so-called good cooks use the same science, some consciously and others unconsciously? Two people can attempt to make the same kind of pie, use identical ingredients, and follow instructions to the letter. One will be a failure, while the other one will be the last word in culinary achievement. Why? In the first case, the one cook approaches pie making with trepidation. She knows she has had pie failures in the past and worries how this one is going to come out. She doesn't have a perfect mental picture of an appetite-satisfying golden brown crust with a wonderful zestful filling. She's upset and nervous, and without her knowing it, her uneasiness is communicated to her pie making. The second one is aware. She knows that her pie is going to be tops, and it is. The primary mental picture, her belief, makes it so. If you are a mediocre chef, but you like to cook, that's a very necessary requisite, too. Sell yourself on the idea that you can prepare superior dishes. You can do it, for you have the forces inside of you, and they will come to your aid if only you will believe in them and call upon them. So put your heart and soul into the next pie you make. Envision it as perfect, and you will be surprised when you see the realization of your mental picture. The same law will work no matter where it is applied, and that goes for everything from fishing to money making or success in business. Let's take an example out of the war. When he left the Philippines, General Douglas MacArthur declared, "I shall return." With our Pacific Fleet in ruins at Pearl Harbor, and with the Japanese in control of most of the South Pacific, MacArthur had no physical evidence that he would ever return. However, it was a statement of confidence or belief. He must have had a mental picture of his returning, and history relates how he kept his promise. Thousands of similar cases happened during the war, and are happening today. End of chapter. I'll meet you at the next video, where Claude Bristol is now going to go into something interesting on chapter 5. It's called The Art of Mental Pictures. Like, share, and subscribe.